Jacob was an accomplished middle-aged engineer, married, respected in his community, and living a seemingly quiet life. But behind closed doors, Jacob was trapped in a private hell of his own creation. Beginning in his early childhood with simple compulsive habits, his sexual behavior had gradually escalated into an overwhelming, out-of-control fixation. As an adult with advanced mechanical and electrical skills, Jacob decided to solve what he saw as a logistical problem: how to maximize sexual pleasure without interruption. He gathered wires, microcontrollers, custom circuitry, and electronic stimulation hardware, painstakingly engineering a physical device in his workshop. It was a literal masturbation machine, designed to deliver precise electrical impulses that kept his nervous system hovering at the edge of climax for 6, 8, even 12 hours at a time. When Jacob sat in Dr. Anna Lembke's psychiatric office at Stanford University, he was broken. His machine had not brought him infinite happiness. Instead, it had shattered his marriage, destroyed his health, alienated him from his loved ones, and left him in a state of profound emotional numbness and despair. While Jacob's story sounds extreme, Dr. Lembke makes a startling observation. Jacob's machine is not an anomaly. It is an honest physical mirror of the world we have constructed for ourselves. Today, nearly every human being in modern society carries a version of Jacob's machine in their front pocket. Our smartphones, social media feeds, online shopping portals, streaming services, high-potency cannabis, hyper-palatable foods, and infinite digital entertainment are custom-engineered, high-dopamine delivery systems. We have created a world of absolute, unprecedented abundance, transforming ourselves into modern monks trapped inside a carnival of instant gratification. To understand why we feel so anxious, distracted, unfulfilled, and chronically depressed, despite living in the most comfortable era in human history, we have to understand the fundamental neurobiology of reward. We have evolved to survive in a world of scarcity, but we now inhabit an environment of lethal overabundance. How did our survival circuitry betray us? Why does the relentless pursuit of pleasure inevitably lead to pain? And most importantly, how can we restore balance to our minds in an age of constant indulgence? To answer these questions, we must look past our subjective feelings and examine the chemical currency that drives every human choice. Dopamine. Dopamine is often called the pleasure molecule, but that definition is incomplete and misleading. Dopamine is not primarily the chemical of feeling good. It is the neurotransmitter of wanting, searching, anticipating, and motivation. It is the evolutionary whip that drove our ancestors to forage for berries, hunt dangerous game, seek out mates, and build shelter. When dopamine surges in the brain, it signals that something novel, rewarding, or essential for survival is near, compelling us to reach out and consume it. In the 1950s, neuroscientists James Olds and Peter Milner conducted a famous experiment with laboratory rats. They implanted electrodes directly into the reward centers of the rats' brains, specifically targeting areas rich in dopamine pathways, such as the nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area. They placed the rats in a box with a simple lever. Every time a rat pressed the lever, it received a microburst of electrical stimulation that triggered a massive release of dopamine. The results were astonishing and horrifying. Given the choice between pressing the lever for dopamine or eating, drinking, and caring for their offspring, the rats chose the lever every single time. They pressed it up to 7,000 times an hour. They walked across electrified grids that burned their paws just to reach the lever. They ignored food to the point of starvation and water to the point of fatal dehydration. They pressed the lever until they literally collapsed from physical exhaustion. The rats were not experiencing continuous bliss. They were trapped in a state of endless, compulsive craving. The dopamine did not satisfy them. It compelled them to want more. To understand why high dopamine behaviors lead to destruction, Dr. Lembke offers a simple yet profound metaphor. Imagine a seesaw inside your brain. On one side of the balance sits pleasure. On the other side sits pain. When your brain is at rest, the seesaw is level, in a state of balance known as homeostasis. When you engage in an activity that releases dopamine, whether that is eating a slice of chocolate cake, receiving a notification on your phone, playing a video game, or taking a drug, the seesaw tips down on the side of pleasure. The higher and faster the dopamine spike, the steeper the seesaw tips. However, the brain is programmed to maintain balance at all costs. It hates being tilted toward pleasure for too long. To bring the seesaw back to level, the brain deploys internal self-regulating mechanisms. Imagine tiny neurochemical gremlins jumping onto the pain side of the seesaw to push it back down. Here is the crucial catch. These gremlins do not just bring the seesaw back to level. They stomp down hard on the pain side to compensate for the pleasure spike. This counter-reaction is known in neuroscience as the opponent process mechanism. Every time you experience a spike of pleasure, it is immediately followed by a corresponding dip into pain. This dip is the subtle feeling of disappointment, restlessness, or craving you feel right after a good experience ends. It is the urge to check your phone again 3 seconds after putting it down. It is the desire for a second glass of wine when the first one wears off. It is the post-dopamine crash. If you wait long enough, the gremlins hop off the pain side, and the seesaw returns to its level baseline. But what happens if you don't wait? What happens if, the moment you feel that uncomfortable dip into pain, you immediately reach for another high dopamine hit to tip the balance back toward pleasure? Consider the case of Chris, a high-achieving young professional who suffered from mild insomnia and evening anxiety. To help himself relax, Chris began smoking a small amount of cannabis before bed. At first, it worked like a miracle. His anxiety melted away. Dopamine flooded his brain and he fell into a deep sleep. Within a few months, however, Chris noticed something troubling. The small amount of cannabis that used to put him to sleep no longer worked. He needed a higher dose and then an even potent concentration. Soon, he was consuming high-potency cannabis concentrates throughout the evening. Even worse, his baseline anxiety during the day, when he wasn't high, became agonizing. He couldn't concentrate at work, felt constantly irritable, and experienced sweating, nausea, and severe restlessness whenever the drug wore off. What happened to Chris is a process called neuroadaptation, or tolerance. Because Chris constantly bombarded his brain with high dopamine stimuli, his brain adapted to survive the overload. The neurochemical gremlins didn't just hop onto the pain side temporarily. They moved in permanently, setting up camp on the pain side of his seesaw. To make matters worse, his brain downregulated its natural dopamine receptors and slowed down its internal dopamine production. This shift creates what Dr. Lembke calls a chronic dopamine deficit state. In a dopamine deficit state, your baseline for daily existence drops far below level. You are no longer engaging in the behavior or taking the substance to feel good, to experience joy, or to get high. You are doing it simply to feel normal, to escape the agonizing weight of the pain gremlins camped out on your balance. The things that used to bring you subtle joy, a conversation with a friend, a walk in the woods, a good book, a quiet meal, now feel completely flat, dull, and uninteresting. This inability to feel pleasure from normal everyday activities is known medically as anhedonia. This trap is not reserved for illicit drug users or extreme cases like Jacob. It happens quietly to millions of ordinary people every single day through seemingly harmless digital habits. Dr. Lembke candidly shares her own battle with this exact phenomenon. As a world-renowned psychiatrist, professor, and author, Lembke found herself slipping into a secret, compulsive addiction. It didn't involve drugs or alcohol. It began with reading a popular vampire romance novel. The narrative suspense and romantic build-up delivered a potent hit of dopamine. Soon, one book wasn't enough. Lembke began downloading dozens of romance novels onto her e-reader, reading them late into the night. She would read while walking down the hall, while waiting for patients, and while sitting at red lights. When the quality of published books wasn't enough, she sought out increasingly intense, trashy, and explicitly sexual romance series. She spent hundreds of dollars, hid her reading from her husband and children, and woke up every morning feeling exhausted, ashamed, and mentally fogged. When she tried to stop, she experienced genuine withdrawal, anxiety, irritability, and a desperate pull to buy just one more digital book. Lembke's personal confession highlights a vital truth. Dopamine addiction is not a character flaw or a sign of moral weakness. It is a biological response to an environment that offers limitless, low-cost, high-yield dopamine rewards. Whether it is romance novels, online gambling, social media, shopping, sugar, or sports betting, our primitive brains were never wired to cope with this level of stimulation. How do we break free when our environment is engineered to keep us hooked? How do we reset our pleasure-pain balance when our seesaw is stuck firmly on the side of pain? To help her patients navigate the path back to balance, Dr. Lembke developed a practical, step-by-step clinical framework represented by the acronym D.O.P.A.M.I.N.E. This process provides a clear roadmap for anyone looking to regain control over their compulsive habits. The first letter, D, stands for data. Before you can change a behavior, you must gather simple, unvarnished facts about what you are actually consuming. You cannot rely on vague estimates or rationalizations. You must track the exact frequency, duration, and volume of your habit. How many hours a day are you spending on your phone? How many drinks are you having per week? How much money are you spending on online shopping? When Delilah, a 20-year-old college student who came to Dr. Lembke suffering from severe anxiety and depression, was asked to track her cannabis use, she was shocked. She believed she was smoking once or twice a day to take the edge off. When she actually recorded every session, she realized she was hitting a vape pen dozens of times from morning until night, keeping herself in a perpetual fog. The second letter, O, stands for objectives. You must examine the reasons why you turn to your dopamine source in the first place. What problem are you trying to solve? What uncomfortable feeling are you trying to escape? High dopamine behaviors are rarely about pure pleasure. They are almost always emotional coping mechanisms. People scroll through social media to escape loneliness or boredom. They drink to relieve social anxiety. They play video games to escape feelings of inadequacy at work. Recognizing the underlying objective allows you to treat the root cause rather than just fighting the symptom. The third letter, P, stands for problems. You must map out the negative consequences of your behavior across every domain of your life. Physical health, mental well-being, finances, work performance, and personal relationships. Crucially, young people and early-stage overconsumers often struggle with this step because the damage is subtle or hidden. Delilah initially claimed cannabis had zero negative effects on her life, but as she looked deeper, she realized her GPA was dropping, her memory was impaired, she had lost interest in her hobbies, and her relationship with her parents was fractured. The fourth letter, A, stands for abstinence. This is the cornerstone of the recovery process. To reset a broken reward system, you must commit to a period of total abstinence from your target dopamine trigger. Dr. Lembke recommends a standard reset period of 30 days. Why 30 days? Science shows that it takes approximately 4 weeks of total abstinence for the brain to clear the neurochemical gremlins from the pain side of the balance, upregulate dopamine receptors, and restore natural, baseline dopamine firing rates. The first 2 weeks of abstinence are notoriously difficult. You will experience a temporary surge in pain, anxiety, irritability, depression, and intense cravings. This is not proof that you need the substance or habit. It is the physical sensation of neuroadaptation resetting itself. If you can persevere through the initial storm, by weeks 3 and 4, the fog begins to clear, baseline mood improves, and natural pleasures return. The fifth letter, M, stands for mindlessness. During the abstinence period, you must bring conscious awareness to the automatic, mindless triggers that lead to consumption. Notice the emotional states, physical environments, time of day, or social cues that trigger your automatic impulses. When do you reach for your phone? Is it when you feel stuck on a difficult work task? Is it when you step into an elevator? Recognizing these mindless patterns bridges the gap between unconscious impulse and conscious choice. The sixth letter, I, stands for insight. True insight cannot be achieved while your brain is constantly submerged in high dopamine stimuli. It is only after completing the 30-day reset that your prefrontal cortex, the rational, planning center of the brain, comes back online. From this clear perspective, you can look back and recognize how profoundly the behavior was altering your mood, perception, and choices. Delilah realized that the cannabis she was taking to cure her anxiety was actually the primary driver of her anxiety. The seventh letter, N, stands for next steps. Once the 30 days are complete, you face a strategic choice. Do you maintain total abstinence moving forward, or do you attempt to reintroduce the behavior in moderation? For highly addictive substances or severe compulsions, lifelong abstinence is often the safest path. For ubiquitous triggers like smartphones, food, or internet access, moderation is necessary. The final letter, E, stands for experiment. If you choose moderation, you must design a strict, highly structured experiment for re-entry. You cannot simply return to your old habits and rely on vague intentions or willpower. You must establish concrete boundaries, rules, and monitoring systems to ensure you do not slip back into a dopamine deficit state. This leads us to one of the most vital practical tools in Dr. Lembke's arsenal. The art of self-binding willpower is a finite, unreliable resource. In a world saturated with hyperpalatable, highly addictive rewards, relying on sheer self-control is a losing strategy. The human prefrontal cortex quickly tires under continuous temptation. To protect ourselves from compulsive overconsumption, we must create physical, temporal, or psychological barriers between ourselves and our dopamine triggers before the moment of temptation strikes. This strategy is called self-binding, and it falls into 3 distinct categories. The first category is physical self-binding. This involves creating concrete distance or material friction between yourself and your vice. If you find yourself mindlessly checking your smartphone late at night, physical self-binding means purchasing a timed lockbox, placing your phone inside at 8 o'clock, and leaving it in another room entirely. If you struggle with junk food, it means removing it completely from your home, so that indulging requires getting into your car and driving to a store. If you struggle with online gambling or shopping, It means deleting saved credit card details, blocking shopping websites, or canceling accounts. When Dr. Anna Lembke was struggling with her romance novel addiction, she realized that simply promising herself not to read was useless. She engaged in physical self-binding by throwing away her e-reader devices, giving her books away, and canceling her subscriptions. She made the cost of engaging in the habit physically high. The second category is chronological self-binding. This strategy uses time limits, schedules, and temporal windows to restrict consumption. Instead of allowing a habit to bleed into every hour of the day, you establish strict temporal boundaries. For example, you might decide that you only check social media between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, or that you only play video games on Saturday mornings, or that you never consume alcohol on weeknights. By creating clear start and stop times, you prevent the continuous dopamine spikes that lead to receptor downregulation. The third category is categorical self-binding. This involves narrowing the scope of what you allow yourself to consume by eliminating broad categories of high dopamine triggers. For instance, rather than trying to moderate all internet use, a person might decide to completely delete all short-form video apps while keeping basic messaging tools. A person looking to manage their diet might choose to eliminate all refined sugar while keeping complex carbohydrates. Categorical self-binding simplifies decision-making by eliminating gray areas and creating absolute red lines. By putting self-binding strategies in place, you outsource the burden of self-control to your environment, freeing your mind from constant internal negotiation. So far, we have explored how pursuing pleasure leads inevitably to pain, and how restricting our access to pleasure can restore balance. But Dr. Lembke introduces a far more radical, counterintuitive breakthrough in modern addiction neuroscience. If pressing the pleasure side of the seesaw causes a painful counter-reaction, what happens if we intentionally press the pain side first? The answer lies in a phenomenon known as hormesis. Hormesis is the biological mechanism wherein exposure to mild, controlled doses of noxious or stressful stimuli triggers beneficial adaptive responses that make the organism stronger, more resilient, and neurochemically balanced. When you engage in intentionally painful or challenging physical activities, such as cold water immersion, intense cardiovascular exercise, sauna heat therapy, or rigorous mental work, the seesaw tips down on the side of pain. Your heart rate rises, stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline spike, and you feel physical discomfort. In response, your brain's internal gremlins jump onto the pleasure side of the seesaw to bring you back to equilibrium. Here is the critical difference between direct pleasure and pain-induced pleasure. When you chase direct pleasure, dopamine spikes instantly and steeply, followed by a long, painful crash below baseline. But when you endure intentional, controlled pain, the dopamine release is indirect, gradual, and sustained. Consider the story of Michael, a former engineer who suffered from chronic depression, debilitating anxiety, and severe addiction to pain medications. After years of failed medical treatments, Michael stumbled upon an unusual practice: cold water swimming. Every morning, regardless of the weather, Michael would walk down to a local lake, strip down and submerge himself in freezing 50-degree water for 10 to 15 minutes. At first, the experience was shocking and agonizing. His breath caught, his muscles cramped, and his brain screamed at him to get out. But as he forced himself to stay calm and control his breathing, something miraculous occurred. When Michael stepped out of the freezing water, his body began to warm up, and a deep, profound sense of calm, joy, and mental clarity washed over him. This feeling was not fleeting. It lasted for hours throughout the remainder of his day. Over time, his daily cold water swims allowed him to taper off his pain medications completely, cured his chronic anxiety, and lifted his depression. Psychiatric research confirms what Michael experienced. Exposure to severe cold water causes a sustained increase in plasma dopamine concentrations of 250%, along with a 500% increase in norepinephrine. Crucially, this massive surge in dopamine does not crash below baseline. Because it was earned through physical stress, the dopamine levels remain elevated for hours, slowly tapering back to a healthy, balanced state. This is the secret of the pursuit of pain. When you pay for your dopamine up front through effort, discomfort, and discipline, the brain rewards you with clean, long-lasting mental energy and peace. To harness the power of hormetic stress, start small. Take a 60-second cold shower at the end of your normal warm shower. Engage in 30 minutes of vigorous exercise that pushes your heart rate up. Tackle the most challenging, mentally demanding task on your work list before checking your email. Embrace physical discomfort rather than running from it. By intentionally pressing the pain side of the balance, you force your brain to manufacture its own internal dopamine. However, restoring neurochemical balance is only half the battle. To maintain long-term balance in a world engineered for addiction, we must also repair our psychological and social lives. And according to Dr. Lembke, the single most powerful tool for emotional recovery is a practice that sounds deceptively simple. Radical honesty. Lying is the fuel of compulsive behavior and addiction. When we are trapped in patterns of overconsumption, we lie constantly. We lie to others about how much we are drinking, scrolling, spending, or eating. We lie about where we are going and what we are doing. Even more destructively, we lie to ourselves through rationalization, denial, and minimizations. Neuroimaging studies show that telling a lie requires complex, effortful cognitive processing. Lying activates the prefrontal cortex, generating internal stress, anxiety, and a feeling of alienation from reality. Chronic lying destroys self-trust and severs authentic human connection. Radical honesty means telling the complete, unvarnished truth about your actions, feelings, and micro-behaviors, no matter how embarrassing or uncomfortable it feels. It means admitting to your partner that you spent 2 hours scrolling on your phone instead of making dinner. It means admitting to your boss that you forgot a deadline because you were distracted. It means stopping the subtle white lies we tell to make ourselves look better. When you practice radical honesty, extraordinary things happen to your brain. First, telling the truth reduces cognitive stress and grounds your nervous system in reality. Second, telling the truth strengthens executive function in the prefrontal cortex, reinforcing self-awareness and impulse control. Third, radical honesty builds profound social trust. This brings us to the crucial distinction between destructive shame and prosocial shame. When our secret compulsions are exposed in an atmosphere of judgment, harsh punishment, or social ostracization, we experience destructive shame. Destructive shame tells us, you are broken, defective, and unlovable. This leads to isolation, secrecy, and a desperate desire to run back to our dopamine triggers to numb the emotional pain. Prosocial shame, on the other hand, occurs when we voluntarily expose our flaws, mistakes, and struggles within a supportive, non-judgmental community or relationship. When we confess our darkest secrets to a trusted friend, therapist, or support group, and are met with empathy, acceptance, and shared vulnerability, the destructive power of shame dissolves. This human connection releases oxytocin, the hormone of bonding, safety, and trust. Oxytocin directly modulates the brain's reward circuitry, calming the amygdala and reducing the compulsive urge to seek artificial dopamine hits. True human intimacy is one of the most potent natural anti-addiction chemicals in existence. We live in a world that offers infinite shortcuts to artificial pleasure, but as Dr. Anna Lembke powerfully demonstrates, these shortcuts are a dangerous illusion. The relentless pursuit of easy pleasure inevitably leaves us drowning in pain, trapped in a dopamine deficit state of our own making. The path to authentic, lasting fulfillment requires us to turn around and face reality directly. It demands that we accept the natural balance of the mind, embrace deliberate friction, set firm boundaries through self-binding, invite healthy physical challenge into our daily lives, and connect with others through radical, unvarnished honesty. You do not need to retreat from the modern world or live like a hermit, but you must recognize the nature of the machine you are operating. Stop running from discomfort. Stop chasing the fleeting high of instant gratification. Pay for your joy up front. Embrace the subtle beauty of ordinary baseline life, and find your balance in the age of indulgence.